Today we have the oral exam for the computer graphics course. For those who are not part of the class, you're going to see teams are going to be presenting their work on their final project. So without further ado, the stage is yours. Who you are?
I'm Louis.
And I'm Caleb.
And our game was a dogfighting plane game. It's kind of similar to the space game, except we just have a different environment, I suppose. And so I guess top level, we just decided on pure keyboard controls, use the arrow keys to look around. Planes don't usually turn left and right so easily, but we implemented it so that it's easier to shoot the enemy. A and D is to roll. Oh yeah, and spacebar is to shoot. So I guess our world is composed of several objects. We have a sun in the distance, which, so we have a sun, which is our main point light, and then we have 4 buildings to show the corners of the level. So those are the boundaries of the flyable area, and each one has like a red light, like a warning. They're kind of like lighthouses. We have a big flat plane, which is actually just a big cube that's flattened out and expanded for our water. And we have a plane model that chases us, but it usually it just looks like a triangle because it's always facing the player, but it actually is like wings, kind of like a stealth bomber. Maybe we can get it to do a barrel roll, but so it tends to follow the player and kind of flip over sometimes. And those are all the like in-game objects, and it's kind of hard to tell, but our water does move up and down a little bit to kind of show like waves on the ocean. And then we have a few UI elements like a throttle bar that shows our speed. You start at an initial speed. Like a real plane, you can't set your speed to 0, so there's a minimal speed and a maximum. And that's determined by a speed factor, so when you press W and S, it increases and decreases that factor. Our other elements here, like you rack up kills by shooting the enemy plane, and you rack up deaths by either getting hit by the other plane or hitting the boundaries of the level, or hitting the water. We also have a radar, and the radar always points, I was going to say it points north, but it actually points towards the sun, so it wouldn't really make sense if it was pointing.
It looks like a sunset, so it points west.
Yeah, and we have multiple shaders for our objects, and Caleb can kind of explain what they do with this.
Yeah, okay, so we have a shader for just the sun, and that shader basically, like, the sun is actually a square, and in the shader, it takes the position, and if it's a certain distance away from the center of that square, it's going to cut it off. So it's just going to set like the alpha to 0 so that you can't see it. And so that's how we created the perfect circle like that. And we also have a shader for just the ocean. And and the ocean has a, like, we kind of created waves in the ocean. First, in the vertex shader, we have this like sine coast thing where, depending on like the time and the position, the corners of the ocean are like moving up and down as if it's a wave. And then we also have something like that in the fragment shader, and that happens like on every pixel rather than just the corners. So then we just change the height of the pixels so it draws the light differently. And so that's how we created waves. It's kind of harder to see on this screen. I can turn the light off for a second. So now you can see it a bit better. There's like waves all around.
So that's achieved essentially by just changing the angle that we feed into the specular light so that it kind of displaces. It doesn't affect the diffuse lighting. just the specular. So you can kind of see the sun reflecting kind of in a pattern in that tower light as well. I don't know if you can see it that well.
And then we have another shader just for everything else, including the buildings and the enemy plane. And that just does basic stuff. Yes, so for collision detection, we have collision detection between the camera basically, so just the player's plane, and the world down. So if it goes past one of the buildings, then it will die because the building shoots it down. And then it also detects if like the player has crashed into the enemy plane. The enemy plane doesn't actually shoot at you; it just tries to like suicide dive into you, just so they both like blow up. And then the final collision detection is between the bullets and the enemy plane. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so the way we achieved our camera is the position of the player is always determined by a vector for, well, we kind of call it the eye vector, so it's the position of the eye. And then we had a gaze vector, which is always where you're looking, and an up vector that's dependent on the rest. So when we press up and down on the keyboard, it's a rotation along
The cross product of the gaze vector and the up vector.
yeah. And then rolling is simply rotating the up vector around the gaze vector. And then left and right is rotating the gaze vector around the up vector.
So do you always stay perpendicular?
The up vector.
Yes, in the gaze vector, right?
Yeah. So when we look up and down, it actually rotates both the gaze vector and the up vector.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for the sun, also in the sun shader, to get that gradient, we just basically remove some of the green from, like, based on the Y position. So like, if it's lower, then it has less green, and if it's higher, it has more green. So that's how it goes from yellow to orange.
So we don't have any actual textures. It was all achieved just through our shaders.
It's a 3D texture, right? Like the one we did in class.
Yeah.
How is the enemy following you? Is it also being controlled with acceleration, like your plane, or does it simply try to match your coordinates with a certain speed?
No, it doesn't have just has a constant speed, and it constantly just looks towards the player and moves towards that point at constant speed.
How did you split the work, guys?
A lot of the work we did together in the lab, and some very minor parts we did separate at home or something.
Okay, sounds good. Any questions for the Dogfighter team?
Is there a maximum height you can?
Yes, something. I think it's kind of hard to tell because you're always looking up when you fly up. If it was a helicopter, it'd be easier to see, but I'm pretty sure you eventually crash. Like if I slow down and look down, it's probably pretty high up here. Yeah, you can fly pretty high. But we made sure that the highest point was still less than the view distance. So if you fly to the very top and look down, it wouldn't flip anything up.
Does the plane stall if you lower the throttle?
You can't lower it. It has like a minimum value so that it's still moving when you're at the
But
lowest.
it will never go start diving down, right?
Did you say, like, what's the size of the ocean? How big is that?
I suspect in our units, I think we had it at 4.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
whereas our buildings 20 wide.
Okay.
And bullets are purple.
And they travel very fast. And actually we had to make them faster so that you can see the frame rate just go way down. So we had to increase the bullet speed so that less of them existed at once.
Any
Any more questions, guys? Okay, thank you very much.